I just saw Apollo 13 for the first time like 2 weeks ago. What really struck me is in the end, they open up the capsule and they get out and they're striding through the crowd. I'm like, no. I don't think so. They'd be dizzy. They don't know how to use their legs anymore. I'm like, come on.
We had a pretty large bang associated with the caution and warning now. Okay, as we have an apparent serious oxygen leak. 4, 3, 2, 1. Houston, we've had a problem. He's in a roll and he can't stop it. Performing an evasive maneuver. Okay, Houston, we've had a problem here. Welcome to space.
Hello and welcome to Failure to Launch, the space history podcast where we take you through all the mistakes, failures, and explosions that made modern space exploration possible. We are your hosts, Quinn,
Chris,
an exhausted Chris.
And today we are joined by a very special guest to talk about the secretive culture of astronauts. Mary Roach is the best-selling author of a number of award-winning books on obscure science, covering topics from cadaver research to bear law to sex science. Crucially for our interview, one of those books is Packing for Mars, which is all about the weird side of space science, and which we have sourced extensively in some of our episodes. In her time as an author, she has written for numerous prestigious outlets like National Geographic and the Journal for Clinical Anatomy. And now, at the pinnacle of a decades-long career, truly feather in the cap moment right here, he's talking to us. Mary, thank you for coming on the show.
My pleasure.
You're welcome for letting you on our show.
Oh, God.
Our listener will be very happy to hear you on here.
I love that you mentioned the Journal of Clinical Anatomy. That just cracks me up that I'm in there. It was some like little intro to some special issue they had, but I was just like, I'm just going to throw this in here just to impress the crap out of people that I'm in the Journal of Clinical Anatomy. Well, like, not that anybody I know reads the Journal of Clinical Anatomy, but
yeah, you're just in like all of these official journals, just as like there's a page that the really official prim and proper scientists, they can post up on the wall and throw darts at, just like a picture like, all right, the lady exposing all the weird stuff. And to kind of start things off, what I wanted to do before getting to really the astronaut culture side of things was just to kind of go over your process for making this book. And obviously not in like asking gotcha questions for a book that was written, 10 years ago, but just kind of how that process went. And something I want to explain quickly for the listeners is to start things off with a gross oversimplification. Your research style is like to find interesting and niche topics that most people know nothing about and like dive in head first. In some of your books, I think you described yourself as the goober with a flashlight. So whenever it comes to, and like by this time you had written books on all like cadaver research, all kinds of things. With space, what made you want to, write a book about the weird side of space, and what made you even realize that there was a deeper side of space to dig into?
It's a very short answer, and that is the video training toilet. See, this was something that I years and years ago, I was writing for Vogue magazine, which is hilarious. If you've ever seen how I dress, I'm wearing like a plaid flannel shirt. Anyway, I was a contributing editor at Vogue magazine. Yeah. So I had this assignment to write about bone loss, osteoporosis, and it was, not interesting. It's like, how can I make this more interesting? Well, all right, astronauts lose bone in space. So I talked to an astronaut who was also an MD, William Thornton, I want to say. Anyway, we were talking about bones, and the conversation strayed, as it often does with me. And he starts talking, I don't know how it ended up where it was, but he talked about the training bathroom at Johnson Space Center, and that there's this toilet with a video camera pointing up. I'm sure you guys have, talked about this, but anyway, it's, you're sort of docking with the toilet. You're not sitting on it, and you got to get the aim right because otherwise you'll clog up the airflow holes. Anyway, I couldn't put that in a story for Vogue magazine about osteoporosis. Like there's no way to work that in. So, but I'm in the back of my head, I'm like, one day I will write about the video toilet. I will sit on that toilet. It was just like in the back of my head. And then years later, I think I met a guy in Antarctica who went on to run the bed rest facility, which is that place in Galveston where NASA pays people to lie in bed for months and months, like at a shallow angle, head down, because it mimics the kinds of changes that happen when you're in zero gravity. And so he was somebody I already knew. And I'm like, really? There's a place where people, like, they're paid to lie in bed for 6 months? That's weird. So I'm like, I started getting this sense that the stuff that I almost said shit, the stuff that goes.
It's fine. Our audience is younger than me, so like anything goes. I was thinking
of your one prudish
listener.
Oh
yeah.
The stuff that goes on the ground to me was kind of more
my true
more interesting.
Mortal enemy.
Yeah. The one prudish listener is my dad, by the way.
No, is it?
Yes. Yeah.
Oh, sorry, Dad.
Yeah, I'm putting him on blast in front of a lot of people.
I was going to say I didn't know that fun fact.
In that case, I'm sorry, father of Quinn.
Me too. Anyway, get this sense that the stuff that goes on behind the scenes on the ground at NASA is kind of more interesting than a lot of what happens up, circling the Earth. Although that can be interesting as well. But that was the germ of it. That's kind of, and then I start from there. I usually start with a couple of little nuggets and I build out from there. Like, wow, what would this book be? How could I fill it up? And that was how it started. I really knew nothing.
So it was finding this one incredible story and then knowing that you needed to write something about this.
Yeah. And then finding out about the bed rest facility, right. Finding out about, I don't know what else, but I just started to fill it in a bit and realized there was just a lot of really cool stuff. And I really hadn't ever reported on space exploration or NASA or the history of space exploration, none of it. So it was all new to me. I was a kid when the moon landing happened. I don't remember it. I don't even think I didn't even come in from the neighbor's house to watch. I don't know. I wasn't, it was all new to me, which was kind of fun. It was brand new to me. Yeah.
Kind of going off of that, like in your book, you talk to people at NASA, JAXA, the Japanese space program, Roscosmos, the Russian space program. And considering how, at least with NASA and JAXA, how kind of prim and proper and incredibly paranoid about bad press these organizations are, how did you, having already had an established tone of your books by then, how did you convince them to let you have access to like the vomit comet, all of these different, like the space toilet, the Japanese astronaut selection?
It was actually not particularly easy. I'll give you the example of JAXA was, first they said, yeah, that's fine. And I bought a ticket to go because I was studying. I had a chapter about the astronaut selection process, and they were choosing 2 new astronauts. And I'm like, can I be there when you put them in the simulated space capsule and they have to deal with things going wrong, the toilet clogging, or I don't know. I don't remember what exactly the simulation was, but I said, can I be there? And they said yes. And then a week before I was due to leave, they said the public affairs woman wrote this very, very nice note that said, I know we said yes, but actually now we are saying no. I'm like, what the F? Really? And I'm like, I wrote back, well, I have already bought a ticket. So I will be coming. I will be there in Scuba Science City. I'll be there. And I hope that we can set up a meeting and I can reassure you and you can feel more comfortable. I can explain what I'm doing and et cetera, et cetera. And I didn't really leave them. I just said, I'm going to be there. Like, what are they going to do? I'm like, hi, I'm here. So she set up a meeting and they reluctantly let me in but yeah, I was just, it ended up fine, but it was, and NASA was, they've got a big public affairs staff and they were sometimes accommodating and other times, there was a chapter that used a cadaver and I'm like, well, my Stiff fans, they love a cadaver. Let's throw a cadaver in the book. So they were doing a capsule splashdown test where, in an off-nominal landing, if it's on its side and the astronaut slams into the side of the capsule, what's going to happen? Will there be broken bones, etc.? They needed to know. It was a safety thing, but you can't use existing crash test dummies because they're for either head-on or side impact. So that they don't collect the right data. So they had to do a cadaver test, and NASA was so freaked out. They're like, no, the Ohio State people don't want you there. I'm like, look, I know those people. They don't care. They want me there. Oh, no, it's the Constellation people. They don't want you there. I'm like, no, they're fine with it. And finally, I get this email that says, Mary, it's not any one person or one thing. It's just everything.
We don't want you to cover this.
What does that mean?
What does that mean? They're just really uncomfortable with death in any way, what they were doing is trying to be safe and prevent any kind of injury. It was a totally legitimate project.
Yeah, it is a good reason for them to be doing this.
Yeah, exactly. So again, I called the guy, I'm forgetting his name now, at Ohio State, where they had the crash sled where they were doing the test. And he goes like, Mary, just show up. I'm like, okay. So I just show up and we're up, I'm talking to the researcher, and then these two guys walk in and they're from NASA, and I introduce myself. Oh, hi, I'm Mary Roach. And
panic.
They look like they're stricken, and they run downstairs to where the students are wiring up the cadaver, and they're like, don't speak to her. And they run into this other office, and they call this public affairs woman, Lynette, and they were like, Mary Roach is here.
Hide every corpse.
Lynette, I think her name was Lynette Madison. God love her. She just goes, Mary Roach is there? Oh, just talk to her. So, it ended up fine, but it was, because I think they realized this is going to be a scene in my book, regardless of what happens.
They might as well try to rehabilitate it somewhat, but at the same time, you're not there for a negative purpose, because ultimately, if we're going to be colliding a human body analog with the Earth in a suboptimal manner, I would rather rather someone that has, donated their body to science, as opposed to, hey, you, college student, would you like to meet the ground in a suboptimal manner?
Exactly.
Well, I have the opportunity for you.
Yeah, NASA has a long history of getting college students to sit in chairs for long periods of time for space science. Maybe they would have gotten a little desperate without those cadavers.
The Dayton, Ohio boys. The Dayton, Ohio boys. They were my heroes. They restricted hygiene study. Yeah.
I was getting ready to bring up the hygiene study. That was one of my favorite parts.
Oh, me too.
Again, it's like the double faceted feature of the astronauts don't want to do it because they're the right stuff guys, and they don't want to lower themselves to that level of having to just be subjected to a suit full of their BO for, 2 weeks.
They were initially they asked the astronauts to do it, and they're like, hell no. We're not, to just sit in the suit, and just do what they got the Dayton students to do. They're like, hell no, we got that scrapped pretty fast. But I love the idea of just being an outsider, walking into this research facility. There's the scientists there, and they're doing their work, and then there's just these kids, these college kids wearing spacesuits, and you're like, I wonder what they're doing. And then they just sit in the test chamber for however, they're just stinking up the place, It's just... Yeah, exactly. And one of them lasted 2 hours, and then when they would take off the helmet, the smell would waft up from the neck part. It was hideous.
It was the world's worst chimney.
Yeah. And then there was the poor guys who were testing because somebody had the idea that how about a milkshake diet? And they were testing these horrible, they were living on milkshakes, and they found out some of them were peeling up the carpeting and pouring it underneath the floorboards rather than consume it. I know. I hope they were paid well. I'm sure they weren't.
Some 18-year-old kid getting in the pod and coming out. Yeah, discovering some new space mutant form of acne.
It gets in the pod, or it gets the milkshakes again.
That could honestly be a good survival movie. of like, yeah, Gemini 7, but recast as like an indie survival. You could do it with 2 actors and like a small car. That's basically what they had.
I'm pretty sure that would count as legitimate psychological torture.
Yeah, probably. Let's get someone on the horn about this.
I think that, unless I'm misremembering, one group of the Dayton guys, it was like a seminary. It was a religious. They were like seminary students.
Yeah,
maybe less likely to complain. I remember from the book you said they started with airmen.
Yeah,
and then later went to like, you got some people from a nearby Catholic school.
Yeah, who'd be.
And they lost their mind.
And one guy demanded that a priest come in at some point.
Yes, that's right. And they like passed communion through the little door that opens up.
Father, it smells so bad in here.
You can't take communion. You smell too bad.
Just we want to accommodate you. We've taken the liberty of pureeing this communion wafer for you.
It's in your milkshake. Trust me.
It's in your milkshake.
You get your Christ cracker in the form of a drinkable slush.
It's just a cube.
I wonder if that's ever been done for like, somebody who's like really religious and they are only allowed to drink liquids.
Right.
What if they congealed like the wine and the Eucharist? What if they put it into like blender. A paste and put it in a tube?
I'm just imagining, like a small 1/2 inch by 1/2 inch cube that is somehow both soggy and oily at the same time.
The worst of both worlds.
I mean, like, we've joked about this before.
Didn't Buzz Aldrin he brought like a little communion kit to the moon?
Yeah,
right?
A little thimbleful of wine, I think.
Thimbleful of wine.
Wait, wasn't one of the, what flight was it that brought up I think it was one of the Gemini flights that brought up an actual submarine sandwich?
Mercury.
Sorry,
no,
Mercury.
No,
that was the corned beef sandwich, right?
The corned beef sandwich is Gemini.
2 crew, yes. I'm stupid.
No, I can't remember.
It was one of the earlier Gemini missions.
Either way,
they brought a wolf. It was from Wolfie's Deli, and it was because it's hours on the launch pad, right? They're seeing it. So by the time he pulled it out of his pocket, it was just disintegrated and soggy and disgusting. And
it was so much better than the
probably.
Meat jello that they were being forced to eat.
Cubes.
It actually had a modicum of taste.
Yeah.
If you were able to float around the capsule and like chase the meat bits. That would be kind of fun if there wasn't a risk of it like getting into the flight computer and frying it.
Based on previous experiences with submarine sandwiches, that completely tracks on them just opening it. It turns into basically organic chaff in the shuttle.
Right. Like if you could make me a hoagie that would not get soggy, and you like put it in a pool and I had to swim around and eat it, that would be fun. And I imagine that's kind of what the 0G experience is like.
It's going to have to become a part of future spacecraft design. The cafeteria room has nothing in it. It's just an enclosed padded open room. Space. Yeah, and you could have anything you want because anything that you don't eat will just get like sucked up and ejected.
Every meal is a food fight, yeah.
Are you saying we're going to create Thunderdome, but in space for food?
That'd be great.
Also, Quinn, I can just post you a hoagie in the mail, and you can experience everything wrong with that flight.
You just have to, like, bounce off the walls, right? Like, you let the food go, and then it's just like a whale, going after krill. Like, you just have to jump at it and just hope it lands in your mouth. Maybe you can do it with, like a funnel that, like...
We did say there would be some deviation. I wasn't expecting an amount.
Getting back to kind of the topics that you covered in this book, were there any, like, considering that this book covered all kinds of things from, like, space toilets to space food to, like, the effects on the body to the effects on the mind, all that stuff, were there any topics that you didn't get to cover that you'd have liked to, like, either just from not getting access at the time or with the benefit of hindsight down the line? I
would have loved somebody to be someone in the U.S. to be more candid about whether anybody's hooked up in the airlock. I would have liked to take that beyond the rumor stage. But were there any other? Yeah, like I made some kind of stupid requests, like for the hygiene chapter. I asked the Johnson Space Center public affairs person, I said, can I explained I have this chapter on restricted hygiene. So when the shuttle flight, this was during the shuttle era, when they land, when they come down, I want to be there right when the door opens to smell it. And they're like, no, Mary Roach, you can't be there when the door opens.
Cannot sniff the astronauts.
That was one of our dying questions from when we were talking about, sorry if I mess up numbers, was it 7 or 8 with Borman on it?
7.
Oh, Gemini 7.
The dying question that we had was, what did Frank Borman smell like when he came out of the pod?
Yeah. I tried to get Jim Lovell to asked him that. I did speak to Jim Lovell. I tracked him down through his son's restaurant, and he's like,
more kudos to you for that.
I explained, I'm not interested in Apollo 13. I'm interested in Gemini 7, and it's a chapter on restricted hygiene. He goes, you're investigating a rather unusual aspect of space flight. But he was very nice. I talked to him by phone, and I said, what did it smell? What did those guys smell when they opened up the door? And he was very polite. He said it smelled, different than the fresh ocean breezes outside. But elsewhere, I've seen him say that it was like spending a week in a porta potty.
Oh,
yeah.
God.
He didn't say that to me, but I saw him quoted elsewhere saying that.
I think the closest would be stewing.
Whenever those crews cracked open the door, and it's just this of just condensed filth.
You could see the smell.
It's like that Simpsons scene where all of the diseases are fighting for control of Mr. Burns' body. All the different kinds of filth, the E. coli and everything else are just in this perfectly pitched battle.
Yeah. And the fact that they had no toy, they had a bag,
Yep.
and he said that Borman tried to go the entire flight without using the bag. It was he made it to day 7. He's like, this is it, Jim.
That is the true sign that horror is coming your way.
Oh my God.
I feel like that's probably the same way I would have handled it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Staring him dead in the face.
Exactly.
This is it.
My fun story is that last year I went to the Strategic Air Command Museum outside of Omaha, and I saw the poop bag there.
Used or not used?
Used
couldn't
or
tell
unused?
you. It was discolored, but I mean, it's also, how old now? Decades, many decades.
Wait, which particular poop bag? There were a lot of poop bags.
I'm pretty sure.
What variant?
You're not talking about Frank Borman's bag.
I don't. Look, I'm just saying that it was in the section where all the Gemini stuff was. And there was a poop bag that I recognized the appearance of. So,
well, I mean, then again, if it was to be Borman's bag, it follows that.
Yeah, it would have been the singular one. Frank Borman produced the one bag on day 7.
He just produced a singular bowling pin, and that's it. Every other
uranium,
bag untouched.
They told me that the food was designed to constipate the astronauts so they didn't have to use the bag because there's no toilets. What can we do? Let's feed them highly processed food with no fiber so they won't have to shit. And maybe they can make it a whole week without
it's such an
using
uncomfortable
the bag.
thought to not poop at all for 2 weeks, and you just have a rock solid turd line just backed up all the way through your large intestine.
But then someone on Earth is also surviving on the milkshake diet.
Yeah,
which is just fluid in, fluid out. They had to have gotten dysentery or something.
Yeah,
100%. What I was gonna say is, okay, awesome. We have this diet. What happens as soon as gravity starts interacting with them? That's an extra force right there. Do you really want your astronauts to land and then some 5 minutes later drop one in the capsule?
Okay, I want to talk about the milkshake diet before we forget.
Yes.
Are we talking what did they put in it? They had to put something because they had to be meeting nutrient needs.
They had this idea that they could, that because it was liquid, because the diet was liquid, they wouldn't need to use the bag. But there was enough stuff in the milkshake. I mean, it wasn't clear. It wasn't clear liquid. It was a milkshake with stuff in it, fiber, and so it didn't work. It didn't solve the problem of like they wanted them to just pee, but the milkshake diet was not the way to do it, because it had enough unsoluble fibers or whatever it is that...
I remember that the first time, Quinn, that we started talking about space food,
you volunteered to go for a week on the milkshake diet.
Well, it wasn't
we
even so much as
agreed
volunteering.
to this.
It wasn't so much as volunteering as it was just the status quo at the time. I was basically just subsisting off of protein shakes. And so... I just had like whey and some fruit, and that's all I was eating. And it's like, yeah, like I get that. Like it's a good point to bring up, but of course it failed because you still have fruit in there. You have fiber,
right?
And
You have plenty of fiber.
That's going to turn into poop matter in the intestines, and so yeah. And I can speak from personal experience. Yeah, you still have to poop even if you're only having milkshake. Yeah,
it's not.
Heard it here first, folks.
Yeah, it's not a clear broth. It's not the kind of thing they have you, before your colonoscopy. They don't say, you can drink all the milkshakes you want. They're like, no, you can only have like bouillon and popsicles.
Here, have some C-Prep followed by something that basically tastes like salt plus water.
Ugh. God.
C-Prep and saline solution.
Something I found very, very funny was that I can't remember if it was in your book or Animals in Space, but whenever we talked about Enos, the space chimp, recently, there was a very funny point where the space chimps also kind of had a diet like that, where if they did really good in their testing, their reward meal was Jell-O mixed with like a load of pre-workout supplement.
That was not my book. I didn't.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't remember that. Yeah.
but that it's some of the best performing chimps got this reward so often they became too obese and washed out of the program. They were just being given like pure bone broth and Jell-O.
That's kind of like the workplace ethos of like, if you're good at your job and you get work done, you get rewarded with more work.
You just have the ultimate swole chimp that cannot exist in space.
Yeah. Poor Enos.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Our boy.
I know.
Yeah.
Enos.
Really the coolest of all of the chimps.
We covered him, and he really is an icon, I would dare say, in governmental employ.
I tracked down his trainer, and because I was like, what's this Enos the penis thing? He didn't know about that, and I traced that back through like 4 not very accurate space books. Each author kept picking up that story about there was a press conference and he was throwing his shit he was masturbating. That was it. That was right. Like he was masturbating under the press cameras, etc. And that's why he was called Enos the penis. And the guy, I forget his name now, but his trainer, he's like, what? He goes like, Mary, they all masturbate. Enos, we called him Enos the penis because he was an ordinary son of a gun. He was a dick. Yeah.
I'll say it.
He was a very unpleasant chimp.
But then at the same time, when you hear about it, it becomes increasingly like, okay, he was a bit of an asshole, but like what he went through, the justification, the electronics failing on his mission and just shocking him relentlessly.
When he got it right. I know. Poor guy. I know.
I don't think it needs to be said, at least from our previous recordings, that I think we all have a we're building a holy trinity in that the Cats of Space got done dirty, Bion was done dirty. Everything
the Alberts,
the
poor Alberts.
Oh my God. Albert's 1 through 6.
Albert 2, Albert 3. They're like, let's change it to Mike. And they did.
Instantly
and then
works.
Mike and Patricia survived. It's like, it must have been the name Albert.
That was.
I wonder if at some point it ever got to like, there were enough Alberts that they could identify the like engineering flaws. It's just like, hey, maybe we should try doing this with the parachute. Someone else like, no. Albert 3, remember? Oh, yeah. It's like, maybe we should change the rocket. Albert 12.
Yeah.
No.
Since the knowledge was bequeathed to me, I'm still obsessed with the concept of the training where it's like, pull the lever exactly 50 times and get a reward, and everything else is just electric shock. Like, there's just, this is a completely like black and white reality of like reward versus indescribable pain.
Right. Something that like under stress, I doubt I would be able to do properly. Like see a light, wait exactly 20 seconds, pull a lever. If I'm worried about like getting electric shocked and dealing with 3 other tests, I'm going to mess that up. And this is like a 4-year-old chimp. And to kind of get into and to segue beautifully, perfectly from space chimps to slightly overgrown space chimps, i.e. astronauts. Something that your book touches on is the difference between astronauts then and astronauts now. So, like, for our audience, could you basically describe what early on NASA and the Soviets were looking for in the first spacemen?
Oh, sure. Yeah. I mean, they wanted that test pilot, courageous, bravado, also short, doesn't weigh very much. So just really macho short guys, basically. Macho short guy. Very,
short,
very...
but tripod.
Yeah. Yeah. That's what they were looking for. And then when by the time we get to the International Space Station or even some of the other science spacecraft, where people are going to be up there together for more than 2 weeks, they started looking at, patience, interpersonal relationships, and forgiveness and chillness, that just the exact opposite. I mean, you don't want 5 Apollo astronauts up on the ISS. I mean, that would be a disaster.
We can't afford
the first
daily
orbital
fist
line
fights.
brawl. Yeah. That would be so much fun though. Like we were talking about the mechanics of doing the orbital flying cafeteria, like you're, a baleen whale or something. I want to see just a completely empty one of those imagine Skylab, that station, empty it out completely, padded walls, and just 2 teams of 3 on either side, and just go. Like whoever is still conscious at the end of this wins. Just right stuff American astronauts versus right stuff Soviet cosmonauts, and just
going full pell-mell.
I'm just saying Apollo Soyuz could have gone very differently or entertainingly.
Now I'm left to imagine dodgeball in space.
Oh, I'm willing to bet you could put some crazy. I vaguely remember watching a Chris Hadfield, I think Mythbusters or Adam Savage collaboration where they were trying to do darts in space, and the 0G made it so you could put some really neat spin on stuff.
I'm just saying you can get some really weird armor schemes in space if you want to start tackling someone.
Well, yeah, because any kind of tackle you'd be flying head first, realistically, at someone. This CTE waiting to happen. This is you. In talking to astronauts, have you come across anything of them bonking their heads on stuff frequently?
I remember seeing when who were the 2 SpaceX guys, the first ones who showed up in the nifty new uniform, Dave and Bob, were they? What were their? The guys, he smashed his head, so at the press conference he's bleeding from his head, which was not dignified and astronautical at all. That might have been after they came back down. It seemed to me like their aim is pretty good. I never saw anybody. They seem to get really good at going through the ring, just flying through. But there must be a period of time where they're missing and smashing their head, right? Before they figure it out. No, the only thing that I heard was that some astronaut, I forget who, told me that when you're sleeping, if you don't have your hands down in the bag, they just float up and hit you in the face and wake you up. Which sounds really annoying. They just float up and hit your head.
It does make
and it's that whole interplay of everything in your body has evolved to leverage 9.81 meters per second squared, 32 point whatever,
32.2 feet per second squared.
Yes, thank you for the Americans who are 3 out of 4 of the people currently in the recording. Yes, and suddenly that goes away and your body doesn't adjust. So it's all right, I guess the arms should still be up here.
Yeah, it's so I just the whole business of your bodily fluids are now, way more of them are up in the upper half of your body. And I remember asking John Charles, who's kind of the medical guy at Johnson Space Center, who was incredibly helpful and forthcoming, because there was differing opinion on to whether morning erections were harder or less hard.
Okay.
And he's here's the deal. What's it called? The line of orthostatic equivalency or something, the point on the body where there's more fluid than normal. And it's above the waist. So there should be the astronauts who were saying, like, I could have drilled through kryptonite. That was maybe Mike Mullane. He's like, no, there's no reason for that. Like, there's no physiological 0G reason for you. It's all you, Mike, whatever your dream was or whatever.
Yeah. Mike, have we considered that maybe you like being in space a lot?
Yeah, exactly.
Maybe a little too much.
We have the physiological data to break you down. Would you like to?
Yeah. That's the conversation I love, like, well, where on the body do you have, where does the line start where there's less fluid versus more fluid, and how, that kind of thing floats
with
my
that
boat.
In mind, I think you mentioned it in your book. Like, you ran into something that astronauts described as like puffy face chicken leg syndrome.
Yes, exactly.
Could you describe that a little bit?
Yeah, like there's the fluid, way more fluid than normal in your head, and your lower limbs are scrawny because they're dehydrated, because all the fluid's up top, and so you feel like you have a cold, you're congested. I mean, for women, I suppose you'd have bigger tits, and also they're not saggy. So it was like somebody described it as a sort of a beauty treatment, because your waist is smaller because everything's lifted up. Your organs are up. Your boobs are up. your wrinkles are fluffed out. But at the same time, you've got scrawny chicken legs.
And something that we have been kind of not dancing around, but we've been covering kind of bit by bit here, is how being in space, it seems like, is very not fun. It's a very kind of Spartan existence, even with all of the improvements that have been made since. You are never going to have any of the same kind of accommodations that you would expect in a person's home. And I wanted to kind of, and this is going to be a bit of a weird explanation leading into a question, I wanted to get your opinion on, like, reading through your book, it seems that the existence of this astronaut, on top of just being, generally shit in terms of quality of life, is like emotionally and psychologically oppressive. So, like, listener, I want you to imagine, if you will, like, you're an astronaut. You have worked your entire life for this job. You have probably put decades into either your education or you've worked for the military. You've sacrificed and strived for all of this. And then once you get there, you're an astronaut, you're basically an office worker. You'll spend, less than 10% of your career in space. And then even once you get up to space, you're massively overworked, you're underpaid, which leads to stress. And, maybe you get, like we talked earlier about people puking, getting motion sickness. And theoretically, you have access to help from Earth, like, around the clock. You have doctors, you have psychiatrists, you have anyone that you could possibly need to talk to. But if you talk to someone, it goes on your file, and then maybe you never fly again. I might be spinning things out here, but do you think that's a kind of fair assessment of at least some of the parts of being an astronaut?
All of that is true, but at the same time, look at the reason that they don't want it to go on their record is that they want to go up again. They desperately want to fly another mission. Imagine it. I compare it to backpacking, which is, it's uncomfortable. You can't bring the food you want. You can't get a good cup of coffee. You can't get a good night's sleep. It might be raining on you, but ultimately, look where you are. You're in this amazing spot where there are very few other people around, and it's just majestically beautiful. And I think it's hard to imagine how cool it is to at least the first time to be in space, like looking down at Earth and floating. I've been weightless, and it's like a drug. I want to do it again. It's so cool. All right, you feel motion sickness for a few days and you adjust and you're okay. And as for the stress, I think they select people who have a sense of, they're kind of, it's equanimity. They deal with stress well. They're chosen. I'd be a horrible astronaut. I'm impatient. I get pissy. I don't like people bossing me around. I would suck. I'd hate it. But I think that those people like me don't make it. I tried out for one of the simulated for Mars 500. And there was a point I made the first cut, and then they said, well, we'll be getting in touch. And I got this call at 3 a.m. and I was like, do you know what time it is? And that was the test. I failed because they don't want somebody who's grumpy about being woken up in the middle of the night. That's that's not an astronaut. And so I think the novelty and the cool factor, you can't underestimate that. I think that they actually like it. I think it's stressful and it's hard, and the part down on Earth, I don't know. Do they like that or not? I'm not sure. I mean, some of them have pretty interesting projects. So it sounds horrible on paper, and as you just described it, and that's accurate. Everything you said, yeah, you're stressed out, you can't sleep, you're afraid you're not going to get another, you're hiding any psychological issues, the food is bland, all of that is true, but look where you are, you're floating around in space. It's pretty freaking cool.
Exactly. It's that experience of being able to say, wow, I can see what is basically the entirety of humankind's achievements.
Yeah.
From up here.
Yeah.
You can witness it all. You can see everything. And it's that
everything that has ever existed.
It seems pretty cool.
You may not be able to, directly see it, but down there, that is us.
Yeah. And I don't get the sense that there's a high turnover. There are not a lot of astronauts quitting,
Because I think we saw that exact same turnout during some of the first missions where I think we've covered it a few times, whereby, Control was telling him, hey, get back inside the capsule.
Yeah. Yes. Ed White. Yeah. They're like, Ed, you got to get back in. He's like, just one more minute. He's like a kid who doesn't want to stop. He's like, just one more minute. I think I can get a good shot here. They're like, Ed, get back in.
Get him back in there. He's got the space psychosis.
Yeah, and the guy inside the capsule is fully like, NASA is telling him, like, if he doesn't get back in, cut his line and go home.
Yeah, it was crazy, yeah.
Exactly. And even, for that, even if he wasn't taking pictures for, what we're assuming is a well-learned person, he knows about, a fair amount of, just general knowledge of humanity. And as the first person to lay eyes upon it,
First
American, thank you. American-centric view. I'll completely acknowledge that. But yeah, to lay eyes upon that, he's going to be struck by it. And also, if that had actually happened, if they had actually cut him off, the amount of backlash probably would have been huge.
Yeah. Oh, I distinctly remember there were a load of conspiracies going around because a few years ago, I think it's burned up by now, but there was a satellite that was made on the ISS out of an old Soviet or old Russian spacesuit, that they just had this old decommissioned spacesuit. They were going to throw it into the atmosphere or let it burn up in a cargo ship. And they're just like, just put some satellite stuff in this. And they let it float off. And that spawned hundreds of conspiracy theories of pictures of just an astronaut slowly floating away from the ISS, tumbling, and just like, all right, that guy's dead. They got rid of him.
Oh, wow. So there are actual photographs of the suit that they stuffed floating around in space?
It just looks like the only difference from the outside is that it has a solar panel bolted like right on top.
You'd think that would have occurred to them, that might be a problem.
At least smashing the visor would make it worse.
Yeah, right. That would look like if somebody shot him or something.
Is this the same thing as the Lost Cosmonaut, or is this different?
No, the Lost Cosmonaut is the, sour grapes over Yuri Gagarin, and the idea of like the Soviets couldn't have done it on their first try. They had to have killed at least like 50 people to do this. And spinning out of that various conspiracy theories of like, oh, here's some faked audio that I found that talks about a female cosmonaut burning up in the atmosphere like a few months before Gagarin, something like that.
Like they would have sent a woman first.
Exactly. I have my own personal frustrations with this, and like it did take the United States a very long time to train and launch women astronauts. But then at the same time, whenever you look at the Soviets and the Russians, who were effectively just like, what do you mean? We launched a woman. We did the record. Why would we launch more? I think it was like there have been 4 female cosmonauts in history. Right. And then there was the one who supposedly, when she came on board, they handed her an apron. Oh, yeah. Svetlana Savitskaya, I think, went on to Salyut. First woman to ever do a spacewalk. I would argue first woman in space to be fully trained for it. Not to knock Valentina Tereshkova too much, although definitely to knock her now because she's like a weird Russian propagandist.
She's pretty
Duma
weird,
now. Yeah. And in fairness, Svetlana Savitskaya today is also pretty weird and in Russian politics.
Is she? I didn't know that.
Yeah. She's in the Communist Party. She's elected to the Duma.
Yeah. Who was oh God, I can't remember my own book, but the senator who went up in space and was sick the entire time, and they named they named like vomit units. Yeah. What was his name? It's in the book. Sorry, it's been a while since I looked at my own book. But they
Doonesbury vomit space. I'm just gonna Garn. Yes, Garn. Jake Garn.
Yes. Right. Yeah. Total boondoggle.
Yeah. And I think for him, it was less of, he wasn't an astronaut beforehand. It was he was a senator.
He was a senator first. Usually it's the other way around.
Like, how do you as an elected official, I guess you have all those strings to pull, but like going to NASA and saying, I need to go to space.
I know.
And then spending the entire time puking and getting made fun of.
Yeah, they had a unit called the Garn, which was something to do with puking. It's in Mary Roach's book.
Audience, go read it.
Yeah, the Garn. Jake Garn, yeah. I know. Usually it's the other way around. You're an astronaut and then you're a senator somehow.
And then John Glenn did both. Like he was an astronaut, then he was a senator, and then while still a senator, he went back. Yeah.
I know. Yeah.
Do you think that we could propel our craft with his vomit?
Ooh. I mean, mass being accelerated.
Well, that pretty much disproved the farting acceleration.
I was literally just going to ask you about the farting acceleration.
Yeah, I forget that guy's name too. But the guy who's like, I'm going to do it. I did it, but I was wearing pants. So I feel like the trousers, the fabric interfered with the actual launching capacity of the flatus.
So you say that this is something that has been pretty definitively. So I say,
yeah, it's not enough. It's not like, if you think about like the point that was made is if you take a deep breath and you blow out as hard as you can, that doesn't accelerate you across.
That's fair.
So, and that's your lungs, unless there's something wrong with you, your lungs hold more
unless you
air
have Elvis's
than your rectum.
Yeah,
exactly. So it seems that it has been laid to rest, sadly.
Yeah. Tragic.
He wanted to go back and do it again, but his future flights were co-ed and he felt like stripping down and farting.
Although
massively.
I have to imagine that, like, regardless of who you are, man or women, anyone, I have to imagine there's enough of like an astronaut brain that anyone would have just been like, yeah, go for it.
Yeah, I think so.
You have the entire shuttle space lab.
Yes. I'm sure it's been tried.
Fully get this, yeah.
Yeah, the human rectum, it's not a fire extinguisher. I just don't in fact, often it's the opposite. So I don't think it would work.
And we were talking like about the puking. I wanted to kind of tie this back into the idea of kind of the secrets of being an astronaut, the kind of culture there. And an example that you bring up in your book is that on paper, until this one guy, I think I have it here, it was Rusty Schweikart. I might be mispronouncing that.
Yes.
But like no one on paper had puked in space, despite the fact that loads of people had puked in space. And he was like the Jesus Christ of space motion sickness because he was the person who admitted on paper in reports that he had puked. And because of that, he never flew again.
Yeah, no one would talk about it. It was like a kind of well-known secret, that among the astronauts. Everybody gets sick. I can't say everybody, but incredibly common to have space motion sickness and be puking in the first couple of days. Rusty Schweikart was quite stricken, and he was due to do an EVA. And if you are in a spacesuit and you puke and it splatters on your visor, there's a number of reasons that's dangerous. So you can't, they will not let you go out if you're sick. The vomit can splash off the visor and you get like acids, it'll burn your eyes. It clings, it tends to cling to your nostrils. And anyway, it's a bad scene. So he was due to do this spacewalk, and it was critical in the lead up to the moon landing. He had to test out various, I don't know what system, I forget it. It's in Mary Roach's book. And he's like, they're going to scrub the EVA. The whole mission's like, I'm going to be the reason that we don't make it to the moon. Like that's what he said. It's like that. So it was
me
horrible.
Puking is going to hold back this entire thing. Yeah.
The whole Kennedys and we will have a man on the moon. So it was horrible for him, and it was well known. It was public knowledge that Schweikert's puking and he might not be able to do his EVA. He owned it. He owned it, basically. He's like, let's study this. That became his thing. When he went back down, they sent him to Pensacola. They put him on the human rotisserie. They did all manner of things to study the countermeasures for space motion sickness. So he was like the poster child for it. And from that point forward, it was like, yeah, okay, it's not going to compromise your machismo to say, yeah, I puked. That
right. It's not as stigmatized anymore because,
exactly.
Rusty took the blow for everyone.
And I have to say, I'm the proud owner of an emesis basin. Do you know what that is? That's a little plastic dish that they give you in the hospital if you're going to throw up. I have an emesis basin signed, autographed by Rusty Schweiker.
Oh, that is so cool.
That is real cool. I wanted to ask, this just feels like it's one of those things, especially if it's like it basically happens to almost everybody. Like, I feel like it would be a problem that requires an engineered solution rather than just it's a red tape and mouths shut kind of problem, Well,
the problem with medication, they've got great meds. When I went on the vomit comet, I was fine, and because they give you Scopedex, scopolamine, which is an anti-nausea, and then dexedrine to keep you awake, because scopolamine will make you very tired. So they could give you meds, but that just delays the adjustment, so you'd have to be taking it the entire time you're in space. So, they just kind of muscle through the first couple of days in the same way that somebody on a ship, your first few days, you feel like crap and then you adjust and you're all right.
Like, so many things in astronaut selection, it seems like such a minefield too, of like, you can have trained your entire life for this and then get your entire career fouled up because you get migraines or you're prone to space sickness or something like that, where like it makes a lot of sense not to send those people into space. But for that person, that has to be just like the biggest letdown in your life.
Oh, yeah.
Something completely out of your control.
You've been trying to push your way forward for this your entire professional life, and then suddenly, oh, wow, I can't do that anymore. Neat.
Yeah, I wouldn't. I'm too nearsighted. I wouldn't make the cut right there.
And I feel, like it's almost better to get cut. I feel like it would be better to get cut for something easy right off the bat, where like, I can look at the CSA's website and say, oh, I don't have 20/20 and I can't get laser and you can't have laser eye. Cool. Done. It's not something where I'm one of 50 people picked out of the country and you get into the centrifuge and then you get cut.
Yeah, exactly.
This might be unfair to ask after, like we talked about this book coming out 10 years ago. You mentioned the Mars 500, the ESA, the ways of weeding people out. And your book covers a lot of that with JAXA. It seems like every single one of these categories seems like the weirdest, dirtiest trick, but that also makes a load of sense. Yeah. Like the book makes a very good point of this. Audience listeners, go read it, go listen to it, however you can get it. The idea of tracking of getting Japanese astronaut candidates, to do the 1,000 cranes, to fold 1,000 origami birds, string them on a line so that, it has a traditional Japanese element to it, but also because you can see the progress. You can see that, like, I think the quote from the book was like, he does good work, but his birds are sloppy.
Yeah. The idea is, basically they were saying a lot of what you're going to be doing up there is tedious and repetitious. You're going to be, say, going along a line of bolts and turning each one 22 times. And you can't start to lose your focus and get lazy on the 21st one. That you have to be just as anal and precise and focused on the first one as the last one. So, but the candidates didn't necessarily know how they were being judged, for they were like, okay, what the hell, we're folding cranes. So they were like, but they were looking at I just loved that they were looking at the cranes like, is the first crane more tidy and more precise than the last crane? Like, does this person, or are all of the cranes kind of sloppy? That was just a really interesting way of getting at somebody's level of ability to stick to a repetitive, tedious task.
with none of the indication of that's exactly what they're being judged for, because at some level you can say, yes, I'm being told to make this many cranes, so I'm going to do it. But will the impact of that task on your success in that program really be indicated, if you will? Because if it's not, then I can see that absolutely being, a source of just people being, pardon my language, absolutely pissed if they wash out because of that.
Well, there were a dozen different things that, they were looking at after they ate. How did they put their dishes away? They were looking at probably
it's a factor amidst 1,000 things.
Exactly. I don't think anybody was getting cut solely on the basis of their origami. I hope not.
Yeah, just like age, education, birds.
Yeah.
What they don't tell you is that the ISS, the skin actually has to be refolded in an origami pattern every year in order to keep it from falling apart.
Oh,
but
God.
You mentioned these anal tasks, like everything has to be just as good because if that 21st bolt isn't torqued just right, something's going to go flying off and you can't go get it. But at the same time, they also have these tests where it's like, hey, we've clogged your toilet. You can be the most perfect, test pilot out there. How do you respond to
exactly,
a tiny, irritating quality of life change?
Especially and that can just be with a biological matter that is normally seen as pretty disgusting on Earth.
And I'm sure everybody listening, everybody here, knows a person who, if the coffee machine in the office were 10% slower, would just become the most unstable person around.
Yes, exactly. But I have to say, in the end, the two people they chose were test pilots.
Yeah.
So, they chose the people you would expect them to choose. I wasn't able to compare their birds, their cranes. I don't know. Maybe they had really, really tight cranes.
Yeah, every single bird has the Japanese Air Force roundel painted on it to really hammer that home. I wondered about that because also in your book you mentioned that JAXA astronauts always fly as mission specialists. They are not pilots. I wonder why they would, I guess because a lot of the qualifications carry over anyway, but JAXA selects a bunch of pilots and test pilots and military pilots to be their next astronauts. And those astronauts are going to fly as engineers and payload specialists and never get near the actual spacecraft controls. Do you get the sense that some of that is due to the culture of we need to send the pilots because they're the best at the pilot stuff? Or is that out of pragmatism of, a test pilot is going to be good at any of those jobs?
I have no idea. I totally forgot that they're all what you just said. I have no memory of that. Was that in my book?
I think so. I may be extrapolating out.
It probably is. It probably is. I haven't read that chapter in particular. I haven't looked at since the book came out. I remember the cranes. I remember various things about that, but I don't. And I do remember the thing about them being mission specialists, but I don't know the answer to that. Yeah.
And the extrapolating, that's definitely on me of connecting those 2 points. But dumb question. By the time a book has come out, have you already moved on and started researching the next topic?
Sometimes I have. If I have, sometimes I don't have another idea yet. But given that it's almost a year between when I turn a book in and when it comes out, it's 9 months to a year. So often I'm already starting another project. Yeah. Cool. So I've moved on, but in a sense, you never really entirely move on. I'm always still interested in things that are space related. I obviously don't follow it as closely as I did.
So one of the main questions I wanted to ask, something that was really been bugging me for a while, is with how much of both the agencies themselves being so prudish, being so worried about bad press, and astronauts themselves being worried about maintaining this kind of, we can't talk about this stuff because we want to fly again. How did you get so many astronauts to come out and talk about this stuff? I guess a lot of it would have been in the past by that point, but it seems like they were kind of spilling the beans in a lot of ways.
I had to go to Star City and talk to retired cosmonauts is the answer. A lot of the best stuff, particularly anything having to do with sex, I had to go to Russia. But Jim Lovell was fairly forthcoming. Again, retired. I think that the key is if they're retired and they're no longer representing the space agency, then they're a lot freer to talk. And Mike Mullane, he wrote his own book. So he talked a lot about this stuff in his book. So I quoted him a fair amount. I didn't really talk to that many currently active astronauts. Commander Whitson I talked to. Hadfield is pretty forthcoming. I talked to him years ago for a Discover story. He's pretty cool, and they let him get away with being fairly candid.
But even then, he's not going to talk about the masturbation stuff. He's going to keep it PG-13.
Probably, he probably is. Although he's got a good sense of humor. I didn't ask him. Yeah, part of it is it's hard to I remember I wanted to talk when I did speak to Commander Whitson. They're like, okay, you are scheduled at this precise hour, and you will come in and sit in this booth, and then she will speak to you, and you have 7 minutes. I mean, I don't know if it was 17 minutes, but it's easier to get an interview with a A-list celebrity actor than it is to get an interview with an active, particularly, Commander Whitson. But, I had a question in my head that I wanted to ask her about menstruation in space, and in zero gravity, would the blood even come out? Could you use a pad, or do you have to use a tampon? But I somehow just couldn't bring the conversation around to asking her that. And it just seemed a little too...
Just how curt it was supposed to be, it sounds like.
It just didn't... I found that I didn't ask. And that was something I wanted... And I certainly didn't ask her about sexual urges and masturbation. I don't know. You're just I'm speaking to an astronaut. I have to have a certain amount of decorum and professionalism, and I can't really ask her about tampons. I don't know.
I'm left wondering how much of this will become deathbed confessions once it comes their time. No. Rather than let the knowledge be lost, they finally will let someone know at the very end.
Oh, God.
I did find out the answer, which is they all go on the pill before
they
fly. So they are... So nobody's, or very few of them actually have their periods in space. So, but at the time, I didn't know that, and I didn't ask her. So sometimes there's things, I don't know, you've got to be drinking whiskey with cosmonauts at 10 in the morning to have the conversation that you really want to have. It was a lot of fun. I love those guys.
It also sounds like only 17 minutes to really kick the door down and get to the nitty-gritty of it.
Right. I mean, if I'd had a whole afternoon.
And you can't exactly send that in the follow-up email of hey, thank you for talking to me. By the way, I wanted to ask about this.
To a NASA-monitored email.
Yeah, that's the other thing about NASA is there is a person in the room with you when you're interviewing. And
you're getting chaperoned?
On the phone. Yes, there's a chaperone. I have to say, my chaperone was sitting in the corner on her phone. I mean, she didn't give a shit.
She was listening for 3 words, and that's it.
Yeah. It's like when I was on a ballistic missile submarine. At the end of it, the guy said, "I need to look at your notebook." I'm like, "What?" My reporter's notebook is, "I need to read your notebook." And he was just scanning for classified words. He wasn't actually reading. He's just skimming. He's like, "Okay, fine." Because I was like, "Well, I said something about him in there."
Oh, I guess it would be good to talk about because, space and living in a nuclear submarine does sound so similar sometimes. In space, you can look outside, but if you look outside, you just see the grandeur of the cosmos and whatnot. You don't actually see anything that your human brain is used to interpreting. And it's, arguably the same thing in a submarine of your entire world is this little tube.
Yeah.
And you are also similarly overworked, underpaid, and you're not getting enough sleep, and you have a massive amount of responsibility on your hands.
Yes. Yeah, exactly.
And one little hole and it's all over.
Oh, yeah. Oh my God, yeah.
Just the time scale is all that matters.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's I guess it's the difference of exploding and imploding, but if you're inside
Fires on board are very dangerous.
Yeah.
And you've got to be really quiet too. And there's no, you can't look out the window, but for that reason, by the end of I don't know, how long was I down? 3 or 4 days. I can't remember, but they let me go up, the conning tower up to the very top. And so you come out and it was this beautiful, breezy white caps on the water. It's just like, God, I just sat up there for 40 minutes. It was just so exhilarating to see the ocean and the sky and the birds, because you see nothing when you're down, and those guys go out for months, as long as the food supply lasts, basically, because they're not going to run out of fuel. They've got a nuclear reactor down there. So they're just,
if I'm not mistaken, the common length of patrol for the nuclear submarines is 3 months, I want to say?
Yeah.
And most of that is going to be...
Yeah, like you're underwater the whole time.
And the entire point of a ballistic submarine or ballistic missile submarine is I'm going to sit here and be a quiet hole in the water until the signal comes to become the end of all.
Yeah, my whole job is to stay invisible and move around underwater. I mean, they do come up from time to time, and they, so they can get email and stuff. But you're down for months.
And the 19-year-old in charge of handling this weapon or that weapon is operating on maybe 2 hours of sleep on that on the day that the order does come down.
Sleeping in a bunk that is essentially the size of a coffin.
Or, as you mentioned in your book, sleeping in a bunk, like, I guess this does kind of dovetail with the space stuff of literally just putting accommodations anywhere they will fit, of like, all right, we need to get more people into this boat. Hey, there's a rack in between the missiles.
Yeah.
It's
was
nice
the luxury
and warm.
Accommodations was like, you had more, between the missile silos, the Trident missiles. That was like, yeah.
Awesome.
To kind of get us back to the astronauts, something I do remember you talking about in Packing for Mars is that in order to, like, these people are living together, even people specifically picked to be the nicest and most team players out there will still over time find ways to hate each other, find tension, because that just kind of naturally builds up. And you talk about this tradition of venting at mission control. It just sounded so interesting and kind of fun and horrible for mission control.
Yeah, they tend to put former astronauts on mission control. I mean, that's what they did on Gemini and Apollo, was always somebody who'd flown who, number one, knows not to ask you to do something that's logistically really annoying, because you've been up there and you know what's going to be really annoying. But also they know that you're going to take it out on mission control, because you can't take it out on each other because you depend on each other, and you can't bitch someone out, so you take it out on whoever is on the microphone, and they know not to take it personally. Yeah.
I think I mentioned it the last time we talked, but like our show, our obsession, starting with what you wrote in Packing for Mars, has just been Gemini 7, that mission, Frank Borman, Jim Lovell crammed in there. Yeah, just and Frank Borman getting more and more and more mad at the flight surgeon.
They're asking him, "Are you having any dandruff, Frank?" And he's like, "Dandruff? Yes, dandruff." And then like silence. And then finally he goes, "No." "Okay, very well, thank you." I mean, it was like reading the mission transcript for Gemini 7. It was so entertaining. I mean, there's obviously, a lot of sort of jargon and tech talk, but just like seeing Frank Borman get more and more annoyed with it, because it was part of it was a medical mission. It's like, what's happening to their skin? What's happening to their scalp? Is it just, is it too gross? So they're like, is your skin still moist? Are you using the moisturizer? He's like, it's like, I'm not talking about moisturizer. I'm a man. I'm Frank Borman. I don't discuss moisturizer. It's just
those are our absolute favorite moments of Gemini 7. I
actually
Frank Borman on this podcast has immortalized, aside from being like a rootin' tootin' cool astronaut, like he's just grumpiness personified on that mission, and it's just so fantastic.
Jim Lovell said to me when I talked to him, he was talking about something about Frank, spending 7 days, was it 7 or 14 days? I can't remember. He's like, spending that amount of time with Frank Borman. Then he goes, well, spending that amount of time with Frank Borman anywhere, like not just in space, but, and the fact that he said that suggested to me that it was a pretty tough time dealing with Frank Borman. But Frank Borman, at the time I wrote the book, I think he had a car lot. He was a car salesman. He owned a car dealership somewhere in Arizona. And I thought about trying to contact him, but some of those Apollo astronauts, they just charge you money for interviews, and that's a weird transaction. I don't pay for it.
Gotcha. Okay, I've managed to track them down from our previous episodes. I'll see if this works. I have some of the Frank drops. I went through the transcripts and I went through the audio and painstakingly
The audio?
Yeah, there's hundreds of hours. Also, a caveat that doesn't come through in the transcript is it's around Christmas, so the radio is blasting Christmas music solidly about 12 hours a day as these men are just rotting. So let's see if this works. This should be the greasy one.
Gemini 7, this is Surgeon. Frank, do you have any lotion remaining?
Any lotion?
Roger.
We have some, but we sure don't need it. Jack, we're as greasy as can be.
Wonderful.
Wonderful. Yeah. That's the best.
To be greasy Frank Borman
I know.
space.
Oh my God.
Just me and the boys all greased up.
Yep.
Yeah.
Just floating, developing a nice layer of sebum.
Can you search the audio by keyword? You can, the written transcript, but how did you find that?
What I did, and there was not an intelligent way to do this. This was me being very bored and having way too much free time. Was I went through, I got the audio and I had the transcripts, and I would pick random points in the audio, try and find words, Control F them into the transcript, and try and figure out all right, well, this is this page, and I want to be here, so I have to be approximately, I'll look at the timestamp. I want to be approximately 30 hours ahead or something like that, and just
right.
If you have requests, I can try and find them. I think most of the things that were actually recorded were unfortunately just ground to spacecraft. There's not any that I can find that are inside the spacecraft. If we're at this point in the show, I will just play the ones I've got. So there's the dandruff one.
Yes.
Stand by for the Surgeon, Gemini 7. Gemini 7, this is Surgeon. Have you had any dandruff problem up there, Frank? Say again?
No, negative.
Good show.
You can just hear the start of him really degrading into anger.
Just I left thinking it's how he feels the moment he hears the words "stand by for surgeon."
Yes. He's oh no, it's surgeon.
There's an activation phrase for an astronaut at that point in time to just get mad. I think that might be it. Stand by for
surgeon, the most annoying motherfucker on the planet right now.
I love that he's not the surgeon, he's surgeon. Stand by for surgeon.
Especially because I'm pretty sure they can track their all their vitals. They can probably correlate.
Just watching Frank Borman's heart rate
blood pressure and heart rate. Just
Oh, and I do have one more fun one. Because I can't remember if this was also in Packing for Mars, but one of the reasons we love Gemini 7 is that it is also the first orbital, we consider it the first orbital owning of a man, because whenever, and I will send you the pictures, I don't have them handy, whenever Gemini 6 floats up and rendezvous with them after a while, I think on day 13, Gemini 6 only has to endure this for a few hours. As they float up, Gemini 7 sees a sign in the window that just reads "Beat Army" in huge letters.
Yes!
Because all of the three crews, so Jim Lovell, as well as the crews of Gemini 6, they are all, if I'm remembering right, Navy Academy guys, and Frank Borman is a West Point guy. And they had just had the Army-Navy game, so they immediately float up after 13 days of
misery.
Mission control not telling them the result of the game, and just we won. And then this comes over the radio.
You're too much, 6.
Frank Borman, the most annoyed man in space.
Tied up with just looking into the other window and just seeing someone's stomach pressed up against it with "Go Army."
Oh, just at this point, I don't want this to entirely turn into just reminiscing about Gemini 7. Yeah, there will be a spin-off series at some point about how his wife is doing, who is expecting at this point, and Mission Control just refusing to give him a straight answer. Was
I forgot
so much
about
fun.
That.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Well, I mean, my mind is settling on like the pragmatic sense of like, leave it nebulous, because if something happens, you wouldn't want him to know until he's on the ground, because it could compromise his mission effectiveness.
Well, then what's he going to do? Throw a tantrum as a wobbly-legged idiot inside of an aircraft carrier? I mean, and that's nothing
when you consider that a Gemini spacecraft didn't have an airlock, like if you wanted to go on a spacewalk, you just opened the door and vented the entire spacecraft, reach up, pull a couple of levers. That is the tantrum that is needed to vent a Gemini space capsule to hard vacuum. And as the book very much establishes, these guys were not wearing their suits the whole way through because of the, I don't know, like developing stink.
Yeah, they at a certain point, they got mission control to agree to let them just have one guy in the pressure suit and the other guy could be out. You know, so if there's an emergency, that like the guy in the pressure suit can deal with it. Yeah.
But also, I still love the, we're going to keep them in complete dark about this one case. Wait for them to get onto the carrier as they're, wobbly-legged, unstable as hell. And then tell them, oh yeah, no, your team got wiped, because what's the worst they're going to do? Fall out of their bed?
The best part is the context of him being the army guy on an aircraft carrier full of Navy men. So not only does he have to get shown up in space by all of the Navy men, he gets to come down after 2 weeks of being locked in the stink box, having to poop in a bag on day 7, having to eat his like fat, like gelatin cube bacon crap. And then he comes down, has to get rescued from the ocean by Navy men. And then he has to have like, the recovery phase of like, being like wobbly chicken legged and like upper body is full of fluids. He's feeling unwell. And he's on an aircraft carrier full of Navy men who aren't going to let the fact lie that the Navy beat the Army in the Army-Navy game.
Oh. That is pain.
Frank Borman, please come on our show. I will buy a used car from you.
Stop.
Well, you should get him. You should get in touch with him. It's a car dealership. Oh, he's 96. He's probably not selling cars anymore. You know what? If he's still mentally with it, I bet he would love to talk to you.
Oh, sweet.
Nobody asks him to. Nobody wants to talk to Frank anymore, I'm guessing.
And we even have that same kind of angle as with as you did with Jim Lovell on the Apollo 13 of like, no, we don't want to talk about Apollo 10. We want to talk about this other much worse thing.
There's nothing glorious about being in the stink box for 2 weeks.
Mr. Borman, we are your biggest fans.
Well, if you do get in touch with him, let me know, because I definitely want to hear that.
Your thing.
Gemini 7, man. It's my favorite. It's definitely my favorite. And the lead up to it, the Seminary Boys.
Their sacrifice will be forgotten by many, but the few that remember it
will be remembered by us and our audience.
There needs to be a statue to them somewhere.
It has to have like a scratch and sniff too.
Yes. Oh my. Yeah. And you can pull up the floorboards and dump whatever the rest of your lunch in there in tribute to them.
Contribute to the smell. Oh God.
But yeah, Mary Roach, thank you for coming on our show. This has been a blast.
Oh, my pleasure, you guys.
Thanks for being here.
It was really fun.
Thank you for listening to Failure to Launch. If you enjoyed the show, please leave us a review or tell a friend. Everything helps. If you want to follow us, contact us, or suggest a topic, you can email us at launchfailurepodcast@gmail.com. We're also on Twitter at launch_failure. Failure to Launch is hosted on Anchor, and we post on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, Spotify, and Google Podcasts. We also post our episodes with visual aids on YouTube at Failure to Launch. All music was provided by DJ Danarchy.